In our headlines on this Friday, July 24th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung begins a high-profile tour to the Americas today, putting artificial intelligence and economic diplomacy at the center of his agenda. Meanwhile, the Trade Ministry here dismisses concerns of potentially higher U.S. tariffs for South Korea under Section 301, pointing out that Washington has confirmed its commitment to the previously agreed 15% tariff cap. And the government will keep fuel taxes lower through the end of September to shield consumers here from rising oil prices fueled by renewed conflict in the Middle East. President Lee Jae-myung is heading first to North America and then to South America to launch a high-profile trip focused on AI, trade and new strategic partnerships across the region. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off with his agenda.
The president's meeting with four major tech firms includes big names: NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, OpenAI's Sam Altman, Anthropic's Dario Amodei, and Broadcom's Hock Tan.
Anthropic and OpenAI are the two biggest AI service providers. NVIDIA is the largest AI-related GPU supplier, and Broadcom also is a major player in AI-related semiconductors and software.
President Lee Jae-myung will also hold an AI summit in San Francisco on Friday, attended by Samsung's Lee Jae-yong, SK's Choi Tae-won, Hyundai Motors' Chung Ui-sun, and Naver's Lee Hae-jin, along with the U.S. big tech CEOs. MOUs will be signed between Korean firms and the global tech firms, and President Lee will announce his AI vision for related global cooperation.
Major Korean firms and global big tech firms will gather together. It will be a chance to expand our vision for the three mega projects on a global level.
Experts also point out the need for greater cooperation in software amid the intensifying global AI race.
Korea right now is very strong in AI, partially because we have memory chips, but not any higher level GPUs or software. So the president may be asking for cooperation in Korea, trying to expand into this more difficult technical areas.
After wrapping up his U.S. trip, President Lee will pay a state visit to Brazil for a summit with President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He will then head to Santiago to meet his Chilean counterpart, José Antonio Cast, who took office in March, before flying to Buenos Aires to meet Argentine President Javier Milei. The trip aims to expand trade and investment with the South American bloc, while strengthening partnerships on economic security and energy. On the way home, the president will stop by Germany to meet Koreans residing in that country. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration's tariffs under Section 122 expires on this Friday. And in light of this reality, the U.S. has announced intentions to impose a new set of tariffs under Section 301. Our Lee Seung-jae tells us what this means for South Korea.
The Trump administration has announced its final decision to impose tariffs of up to 12.5% on imports from South Korea, Japan, and dozens of other trading partners over concerns that they have not done enough to prevent goods made with forced labor from entering their markets. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative said the new duties, ranging from 10 to 12.5%, follow investigations into 60 economies under Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act. The new tariffs are set to replace the temporary 10% global tariffs that expire Friday, which were introduced after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Trump administration's country-specific reciprocal tariffs in February. Last month, the USTR had already proposed a 12.5% tariff on South Korea and several other economies based on its preliminary findings. Seoul strongly opposed the proposal during the public consultation process, arguing that the planned tariff was both unwarranted and disproportionate given South Korea's existing efforts to combat forced labor and regulate imports. Meanwhile, the USTR is also carrying out separate Section 301 investigations into South Korea, China, Japan, and 13 other economies over what it describes as unfair trade practices tied to structural overcapacity and excess production. The latest measures reflect the administration's broader effort to establish new trade restrictions after its earlier reciprocal tariff policy was invalidated by the courts. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In related news, the Trade Ministry here says the Trump administration has confirmed its commitment to the previously agreed 15% tariff cap for South Korea. The statement comes in response to rampant concerns of potentially higher U.S. tariffs under Section 301. The 15% tariff ceiling was set last year in return for South Korea's pledge to invest $350 billion in the U.S. Recent reports of U.S. tariffs for alleged forced labor practices as well as for overproduction had raised fears of rates surging past 15%. The Blue House, for its part, has vowed to maintain close consultations to ensure all future U.S. tariff actions remain within this boundary. Also here at home, fuel taxes will remain lower through the end of September as part of efforts to ease the public burden of rising oil prices fueled by renewed conflict in the Middle East. Our EG uncovers this latest decision.
The Korean government has decided to extend the temporary fuel tax cuts for another 2 months through the end of September to ease the burden on the public. According to the Ministry of Finance and Economy on Friday, the current tax reduction rates will remain unchanged at 15% for gasoline and 25% for diesel and butane. Oil prices have kept surging, driven by Red Sea shipping risk and escalating U.S.-Iran tensions. Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil prices on Thursday, closed above $100 per barrel for the first time in about 2 months. Following several days of increases, it rose more than 7% from the previous session to close at $100.69 per barrel, still remaining above the 100 threshold on Friday. Officials explained that they decided to keep the tax reduction buffer in place, taking into account the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East.
As escalating tensions in the Middle East threaten to disrupt supply chains and fuel inflation through higher oil prices, the government will maintain a high state of readiness and take all necessary precautions.
Korea is also striving to minimize the burden of living costs on the public. To stabilize the prices of eggs and mackerel, the government will diversify import sources and strengthen the domestic supply chain. The government decided to expand egg import partners beyond the U.S., Thailand, and Brazil to include New Zealand and Poland. To build the long-term egg production capacity, the government will also subsidize farm facilities and support for private egg processing and storage. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries will directly import an additional 1,200 tons of mackerel from countries including the UK and Norway. Officials added that the government will do everything possible to bring consumer inflation down to the 2% range this month, after remaining above 3% for 2 consecutive months. Lee Ju-yeon, Arirang News.
Staying on the local front, as the National Assembly looks to finalize the formation of its standing committee leadership, parliamentary leaders paid tribute at the Seoul National Cemetery on this Friday. National Assembly Speaker Cho Jung-sik and floor leaders from the ruling and main opposition parties, as well as other committee chairs, visited the cemetery as the second half of the Assembly is expected to accelerate legislative work. In the guest book at the cemetery, Cho vowed the Assembly would honor the sacrifice of the nation's fallen soldiers and build a future together with the people. Meanwhile, during a general meeting, the ruling Democratic Party addressed a controversial proposal to strip prosecutors of their authority to conduct supplementary investigations. South Korea's top diplomat to UNESCO believes Busan's hosting of this year's World Heritage Committee meeting stands as proof of international confidence in the country's capability to take on a leading role in global cultural protection. Our Cho Young-won brings us this exclusive interview.
The UNESCO World Heritage Committee not only decides new inscriptions, but also reviews the conservation of existing sites and addresses shared heritage challenges. In an exclusive interview with Arirang News in Busan, the permanent delegate of the Republic of Korea to UNESCO described Korea's role as the host of the 48th session.
Hosting this meeting in Korea means the international community recognizes the country's leadership in UNESCO's cultural agenda and its role in advancing cooperation under the World Heritage Convention. Korea has also taken on an important role in supporting heritage conservation efforts in many other countries.
She explained that Korea has built extensive expertise through the restoration and management of its heritage sites and has been actively sharing those experiences with other member states.
한국은 세계유산뿐만 아니라 또 무형유산, 기록유산 등 굉장히 다양한 분야에서 또 국제적인 존재감을 넓혀가고 있는데요. 현재 문화유산 분야에서 한국의 강점이 좀 무엇이라고 보시는지, 그리고 국제사회에 어떤 기여를 하고 있다고 평가하시는지 말씀 부탁드립니다.
Korea's greatest strength lies in its long history, rich cultural heritage, and experience of achieving rapid socio-economic development while continuously seeking harmony between tradition and modernity.
A key issue for Korea during this year's session is the Phase 2 extension of UNESCO World Heritage status for Korea's 갯벌 or tidal flats. The ambassador said the proposed extension is about more than expanding the site, saying that it strengthens the ecological connectivity and marks the beginning of an even greater responsibility for long-term management.
이번 세계유산위원회에서는 한국의 갯벌의 세계유산 확대 등재 여부가 큰 관심사인데요. 등재에 대한 어떤 기대를 갖고 계신지, 또 등재가 확정된다면 앞으로의 보전과 관리, 그리고 국제협력 측면에서 가장 중요한 과제는 무엇이라고 생각하시는지 말씀 부탁드립니다.
First, it is essential to establish an integrated management system for the entire ecosystem. Second, we need a framework that can anticipate and effectively manage the various threats facing the tidal flats, including sea level rise caused by climate change, pollution, coastal development, and increasing tourism.
Looking beyond this year's committee, she said World Heritage sites are facing increasingly complex challenges, making preventive management more important than ever.
Rather than responding after threats emerge, we need systems that can anticipate and prevent risks in advance. Conservation must respect international principles while reflecting local contexts and working closely with communities.
The future of World Heritage, she says, will depend not only on stronger conservation efforts, but also on community participation, shared benefits, and education that passes its value on to future generations. 조영은, Arirang News, Busan.
In other news now, an appeals court here in Seoul on Friday ordered SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won to pay 944 billion Korean won, roughly $640 million in cash, in a property settlement to his former wife No So-young. The division ratio was set at 2/3 for Choi and 1/3 for No. It reduced the amount paid to No by almost $300 million, but maintained that Choi's stake in SK Incorporated, valued at around $1.4 billion as of April 2024, should be included in the assets subject to division. However, the court did not recognize alleged slush funds tied to No's late father, former President No Tae-woo, as part of her contribution to the couple's wealth. The couple started divorce proceedings back in 2017. The latest military confrontation between the US and Iran is fast becoming a wider test of regional stability as Donald Trump warns of an unprecedented assault while Tehran seeks to open a new battle front. Our Park Chun-han has the latest.
U.S. President Donald Trump is warning of an unprecedented military attack against Iran as regional tensions escalate. In an interview with Axios released on Thursday, Trump stated he is close to launching strikes that will be bigger than ever before. Thursday's night was the 13th consecutive night of U.S. airstrikes targeting Iranian military assets. According to state media reports cited by CNN, the latest attack has left 4 people dead across several areas in Iran. Trump's threat comes as Yemen's Houthi rebels declared a naval blockade on Saudi Arabian ships in the Red Sea, recently targeting 2 Saudi oil tankers. Trump warned that the U.S. will hold Tehran responsible for any further Houthi attacks, calling the rebels an Iranian proxy and promising severe military retaliation. Speaking at an event in Washington on Thursday, Trump downplayed Iran's remaining military capacity.
We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force, all of their radar, most of their capability in terms of manufacturing. Their drones are down 84%, their missiles are down 91%. They have no radar, they have no anti-aircraft, they have no nothing, other than they're mean and they're smart and they still have some capability.
Meanwhile, a Reuters exclusive reports that Tehran is actively strengthening its Houthi allies. Iran reportedly flew Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders new missile systems and gold into the Yemeni port city of Hodeidah on July 13th to fund and bolster Houthi operations. Amid fears of an escalating conflict, the U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday passed a Resolution 214 to 208, requiring congressional approval for war with Iran. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
And South Korea's shipbuilding partnership with the U.S. has taken tangible shape over in Washington, D.C., with the opening of a center that puts into motion the so-called MASGA project. Our Kim Jun-ong files this report.
Korea and the United States officially opened their Shipbuilding Partnership Center on Thursday in Washington, D.C. That follows Seoul's commitment to invest $150 billion in the U.S. shipbuilding sector under last year's bilateral trade and investment deal. Funded by the Korean government, the center will advance joint projects and investment, technology exchange, and workforce training. The cooperation is part of the broader MASGA, Make American Shipbuilding Great Again initiative aimed at reviving America's shipbuilding industry. The opening comes 2 months after Seoul and Washington signed an MOU to establish a joint center and expand bilateral shipbuilding cooperation. Officials and industry leaders from both countries gathered in Washington for the opening. Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan said the new center reflects Korea's strong commitment to supporting America's shipbuilding industry.
First, clear and sustained demand. Second, strong incentive. And third, alliance-friendly regulatory environment. With these 3 pillars, the bridge strategy will become a reality.
He then added that Korea is ready to build LNG carriers while urging Washington to offer incentives and remove regulatory hurdles. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick also attended the opening ceremony and emphasized the need for tangible results from cooperation between the 2 countries.
We are going to judge the center by the capital you deploy, the facilities you modernize, the workers you train, the supply chains you establish, and ultimately the simple number of how many domestic produced ships we make together.
Lutnick also pledged support to ease regulatory hurdles for Korean companies investing in the U.S. Korea's ambassador to the U.S., Kang Kyung-hwa, called the launch a starting point for building a resilient maritime industrial ecosystem between the 2 countries. The 2 sides also signed 15 MOUs across 4 areas of cooperation. Kim Jun-ong, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the New York Times has criticized the Trump administration of double standards following the U.S.'s recent nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia. The Daily points out the agreement could eventually allow uranium enrichment inside the kingdom, despite the reality that Saudi Arabia has no operating nuclear power plants. In contrast, the American paper says South Korea operates 26 reactors, complies with strict non-proliferation safeguards, and has repeatedly ruled out developing nuclear weapons. South Korea, for its part, has long sought U.S. consent for limited civilian enrichment and spent fuel reprocessing. Accordingly, the New York Times shared concerns that continued U.S. resistance could create a rift in the alliance with South Korea. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and his counterparts in the Asia-Pacific region have reaffirmed the need for dialogue and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young covers this unified stance.
Foreign ministers from across the Indo-Pacific have called for renewed dialogue with North Korea, while reaffirming the need for denuclearization and compliance with UN Security Council resolutions. The message came at the ASEAN Regional Forum in Manila, the region's only multilateral security forum in which both Korea and North Korea are members, although Pyongyang stayed away for a second consecutive year. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun said on Thursday that peace and stability on the Korean peninsula remains essential to regional security and prosperity. He said Seoul would keep walking towards peaceful coexistence and shared growth, but stressed that one-sided efforts cannot succeed. Cho called on Pyongyang to respond to Seoul's efforts to resume dialogue and cooperation and urged the ASEAN Regional Forum to play a constructive role in reducing tensions. Many of the 27 participating members expressed concern over North Korea's continued nuclear and missile development. They emphasized both the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and the importance of bringing Pyongyang back to dialogue. The meeting also adopted the Manila Plan of Action, setting out the forum's direction for confidence building, preventive diplomacy, and security cooperation for the next decade. At the East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting later in the day, Cho again sought support for resolving Korea Peninsula issues through dialogue and diplomacy. On the South China Sea, he stressed that freedom of navigation and overflight must be guaranteed, and that any code of conduct should comply with international law and protect the rights of third countries. Participants also called for unhindered humanitarian assistance in Myanmar, while expressing concern over renewed tensions around the Strait of Hormuz. Cho said the free and safe passage of all vessels must be protected in international waters. The meetings followed the ASEAN +3 Foreign Ministers meeting, where Korea, Japan and China discussed closer cooperation with the 11 ASEAN members. Amid growing geopolitical and economic uncertainty, Cho proposed strengthening practical cooperation in areas including supply chains, digital transformation and responses to regional challenges. Wrapping up his Manila schedule, Cho co-chaired the Korea-Mekong Foreign Ministers meeting with his Thai counterpart. Marking 15 years of cooperation, the two sides adopted a statement outlining priorities for the next 5 years. These include digital innovation, climate resilience and smart agriculture, backed by Korean development assistance and the Korea-Mekong Cooperation Fund. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea, for its part, is reportedly hosting a series of events to mark the upcoming July 27th anniversary of the Korean War armistice, which the regime promotes internally as Victory Day. State media reported Friday that labor unions and agricultural groups organized poetry sessions and musical performances praising the regime's founder, Kim Il-sung. State outlets also published daily articles highlighting alleged military achievements from the 1950 to 1953 conflict, which ended in a ceasefire rather than a peace treaty. Meanwhile, foreign diplomats stationed in Pyongyang, including delegates from China and Russia, were taken on guided tours of war sites.
Heat alerts have now been expanded to most of the country, and Pohang and Gyeongju in Gyeongsang-Buk-do province have been upgraded to a severe heat wave warning. It's issued when feels like highs could reach 38 degrees Celsius or higher, or when daytime highs could climb to around 39 degrees. So be sure to stay hydrated and avoid spending too much time outdoors. Saturday will bring another hot day across most of the country, with Seoul reaching 32 degrees Celsius and Daegu climbing to 35 degrees. As the stationary front shifts north into North Korea, a few showers will mainly pop up across the capital area and Gangwon-do province tomorrow. Then on Sunday, the front will sag south again, bringing rain to the central region's Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-Buk-do provinces. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 26 degrees, Chuncheon 24 and Jeju 27 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 32 degrees, Daejeon 32 degrees as well, Gyeongju 36 degrees, Jeju 34 degrees. Looking ahead, the monsoon will wrap up across the country starting next week. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.